outreach grants. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll get to them during the Q&A portion. I'll spend the first half of the webinar giving an overview of the ACP outreach grant programs and pilot programs, and then we'll devote a good amount of time to a Q&A session. We have with us Miriam Montgomery from the Federal Communications Commission to take some questions. All right, well, let's get into it. Okay, a lot of you know who we are, but for those of you who don't, we're the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and we're focused on advancing digital equity by supporting community programs across the country and equipping policymakers to act. We're now at 1,000 affiliates in almost every state, including 12 tribal entities. And we've established a lot of sort of knowledge sharing avenues for people to share their on the ground experience and talk about their challenges and successes. And after learning from our community, we try to draw some of the major themes and align it with our advocacy effort. You can think of our work as following under 4 different pillars. We support on-the-ground digital inclusion practitioners and advocates. We advocate for local, state, and federal policies to promote digital equity and support local digital inclusion strategies. We educate policymakers and the media about the need for digital equity and the work of local digital inclusion programs. And we conduct and support data gathering and research that can inform the public understanding and public policy related to digital inclusion and equity. So for today's agenda, we're going to go over the affordable, give an overview of the Affordable Connectivity Outreach Grant Program, and then I'll get into the 2 sub-programs, the National Competitive and Tribal Competitive Outreach Grant Programs. And then I'll touch on the 2 pilot programs just to give a quick overview of those. And then we'll get into our question and answer session. Okay, just some background, sort of recognizing the importance of really impactful outreach to people who could benefit from ACP. Congress gave the FCC authority in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to develop ACP outreach grant programs. And so the applications are open, as some of you know. The notices of funding opportunity is available for the ACP outreach grant program and pilot programs. Okay, now I'll get into the sort of the goals and the objectives of the ACP Outreach Grant Program. So the goal is to increase awareness and participation of ACP among eligible households. And through these objectives, if the FCC hopes to accomplish this. So supporting diverse and impactful outreach, strengthening outreach partners, and just as a result of these activities, hopefully increase enrollment in ACP. So in other words, supporting outreach partners who work very closely with people who could benefit from having ACP and may not know about it or may need some guidance with the application process. Okay, so here are the 2 sub-programs, and these are covered in 1 notice of funding opportunity, the National Competitive Outreach Grant Program, and there's $60 million designated for that. And again, this is to increase awareness of and encourage ACP participation among eligible households. And this is just a quick note about what the funding breakdown will look like. There is $27 million reserved so that the amount awarded to grantees in each state, including the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, will receive a target minimum of $500,000. So again, this is a competitive discretionary program. You have to compete and apply for funds, but the FCC has set sort of these target minimums as sort of a goal so that there is funding available for grantees in each state. So think of this as a floor and not the maximum amount that will be awarded to each state. It's just a target minimum. For the Tribal Competitive Outreach Grant Program, there is 10 million designated for it. And as you'll see in just a moment, the eligible applicants are the same, but the key difference is, this outreach and application assistance is really for those living on tribal lands. Okay, so here is here are some of this is actually an exhaustive list of the eligible entities, right? So the kinds of organizations that can apply to the program for the National Competitive and the Tribal Competitive Outreach Grant Program. So you'll see here government and non-government entities eligible to apply. So community-based organization, nonprofits, but also state governments, local governments, education organizations, et cetera. This is also covered in detail in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Some of you have been asking about this, about the possibility for an organization to kind of serve as a pass-through entity. So having one organization apply directly to the FCC for this funding and then sub-award these grants out. So the answer is yes, it's permitted, but there are some requirements associated with it. So, pass-through entity is going to be really responsible for, ensuring compliance with the program rules and conducting risk assessments for the subrecipients. So the application process can be thought of broadly in 3 phases. There's an eligibility review, and this is where the FCC will review to make sure that the entity that is applying is in fact eligible under the program rules and check and ensure the proper forms have been submitted. Then there's the merit review, which I'll get into in just a moment, but that's sort of the assessment of the quality of the project and looking at its alignment with the program objectives. And then a risk review. So there's a pre-award risk review, and that is an evaluation of things like financial stability or the quality of the management systems at the organization. Okay, so for the outreach grant program, the FCC has prioritized some evaluation factors, and the way to think about this is not sort of if you don't meet one of them, then that automatically means your application is going to be rejected. There's sort of a scoring system, a scoring criteria that the FCC will use and sort of grade your proposal against that. But we pulled out here some of the categories that the FCC has stated in the Notice of Funding Opportunity that will be prioritized when reviewing the application. So, things like your relationship with the population that you plan on conducting outreach with, right? So the emphasis is on trusted messengers. So how well you're able to serve as a trusted messenger to those communities. Your plans for targeted outreach. What does your proposal say about plans for targeting areas with low ACP participation rates or targeting populations that might be hard to reach, such as people with disabilities or people who live in urban or rural areas? What does your past success with outreach look like? Experience with multilingual outreach. We know that there can be language barriers with people attempting to enroll in ACP. So a priority is evaluating how well your organization plans to do that. Familiarity with ACP or knowledge of closing digital disparities. And when there is a tie, the ability to provide a cost share or cost match. So again, it's not a requirement to provide a cost share or a cost match, but it may be evaluated if your application is, tied with others, and it could be incorporated as a tie-breaking measure. Okay, so what can you use the money on? The Notice of Funding Opportunity gives much detail about this, but I've pulled out just some of the categories that have been listed. You'll see that some people were asking about, personnel, can we use it? Yes, there are, restrictions associated with that, but it is a category that is approved. Funding for digital campaigns or outreach materials. All of the things that you can think of that, well, not all of the things that you see listed that support, outreach efforts and enrollment efforts as well. Okay, so there is a neutrality requirement that's really important. Part of this is to ensure, that consumers maintain their choice. And the grant program isn't really meant to increase enrollment with, one particular service provider. So, it's really important that, there's no steering or incentivizing people to one program or another, especially, accepting funding from any participating provider while conducting outreach grant-funded activities is also prohibited. So after the awards are issued, after hopefully you've been selected, there are reporting requirements. And the first one is a progress report that's due quarterly. And here you're really going to talk about what you've, how the project is aligning with the objectives, sort of at a glance what you've done and what you expect to do in the future. And there's a federal financial report due quarterly as well. And this report should be submitted, with the same frequency as the performance progress report, and include any relevant sub-recipient information. And this is really used to assess the financial progress of the award. Okay, so where can you get some help? The FCC has a page devoted for ACP, the ACP Outreach Grant Program, and I can get you all that link in the chat. But what you'll see on that site is a list of where the dates and times when they plan to have office hours for people to ask questions about what's in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. They'll post webinars on that page. There are fact sheets and FAQs on that page. And so this is actually here now, available as we approach the application deadline, and then resources for awardees. After the application deadline, there'll be office hours for grantees and any other additional resources that will help people as they plan to stay in compliance with the program rules or just have general questions. That is still going to be the site that will have those resources. Okay, so now I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about the pilot programs. So the FCC has created 2 pilot programs, and they're designed to increase enrollment in ACP and increase awareness of ACP among eligible households, and they are smaller in scope. The general concept of a pilot is to test the effectiveness or, some improvement or some strategy, and then learn from it. And that's, that is part of the reason why, in general, pilots are smaller. So for the next few minutes, I'll share the general goals of the pilots, some of the things that are common to both, and then I'll talk about each pilot program specifically. So the goal is to, increase awareness and participation among ACP, among eligible households. And you'll see here, the objectives are similar to, what I shared in the outreach grant program, but there is a special emphasis on learning how navigation assistance helps people submit successful applications. Same sort of application phase, eligibility review, a merit review, and a risk review. And as part of the merit review, the FCC has also identified priority factors for the pilot programs. So things like, the number of people in the targeted audience, the ability to effectively track, performance metrics. Again, it's kind of important for that learning that should come out of the pilots, and plans for targeting, whether that's, low-income households or those low-income households that aren't on a low-income broadband plan, plans for targeting communities with low ACP participation. Okay, so eligible funding, again, I've shared these categories, but they are in the pilot program notice of funding opportunity as well. So you'll see here support for outreach activities, and some things that might be more closely associated with the enrollment aspect as well. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the first of the two pilot programs. The first is called the Your Home, Your Internet pilot program. So the goal of this program is to raise awareness of ACP, test improvements to the application process, but this is specifically for recipients of federal public housing assistance. So who are those people? Well, those are people that reside in public housing, people that utilize the housing choice voucher, and certain qualifying tribal housing programs, housing for persons with disabilities and older adults. There is a Your Home, Your Internet report and order, as well as a Your Home and Your Internet notice of funding opportunity. So if this is something you're interested in, there's plenty of reading available to learn more about it. This pilot, as well as the other pilot, they're 1 year duration, so the performance period will be a year. And that $5 million amount is what is designated to this pilot program, not available for an individual to apply for funding for that amount. And the goal is to have about 20 participants from urban, rural, and tribal areas in this pilot. Eligibility in terms of who's eligible to apply. So community-based organizations and nonprofits that are working in partnership with a federal, state, or housing agency, and then state, local, and tribal housing agencies as well. Okay, and here's the second pilot program, the ACP Navigator pilot program. And I just want to pause here to say that, the term navigator here is not necessarily related to the way many people in the NDIA community use that title. This doesn't signal that if you perform navigator activities, then this is automatically the program for you. To think about which program you're eligible for, think of what kind of organization you're a part of, right? Whether that's a nonprofit or a community-based organization or other, and then, match that against what the FCC has listed as an eligible applicant for each of these programs. So the right way to think about it is, what organization am I affiliated with it? Like, what kind of organization is it? And then look on that section in these notices of funding opportunities where it says eligible applicant, and that should give you an idea. Okay, so the emphasis on this pilot is of course raising awareness of ACP and providing application assistance for ACP eligible households. And the sort of performance period, the duration is a year, and there's also $5 million designated for this pilot. And the FCC expects to select about 20 participants for this as well. Okay, so for the Navigator pilot program, there are public and government entities that are eligible to apply. So, this program is really targeted towards trusted and neutral third-party entities. So, states and community libraries, tribal schools and libraries, public schools and school districts. The notice of opportunities sort of list these as examples of sort of those public and government entities that are eligible to apply. Nonprofit entities are not eligible to apply directly to this program and will not have access to the national verifier. So common in these pilots is the opportunity for limited access to the national verifier. But in this pilot, in the ACP Navigator pilot, that's not something that's going to be permitted for nonprofit entities. Okay, submitting the application. Okay, so the big deadline is January 9th is when these applications are due, but we recommend, the FCC also does recommend, getting a good head start on submitting or making sure you have all the proper credentials and registrations and not wait until the last minute. We recommend starting the steps you see here. We at NDIA recommend starting these very soon, around December 12th. So making sure, if you don't have a valid employer identification number, that you have one, creating the proper logins, the SAM, System for Awards Management. I have heard, in the past, some people in our community share that that system can be lengthy, and that, for example, maybe you have that registration, but the account is associated with someone who's no longer working with your organization. Just a lot of potential hiccups with that one. So if you are thinking that you will apply, but maybe you're not still 100% sure, these are still really important steps to just go ahead and get out of the way. And if you decide not to apply, fine, but don't let these things be the barriers to submitting an application. So I talked about sort of the registrations, but it's also a good idea to start entering your information into the application, the grants.gov workspace, beginning that soon. So December 26th would put us, I believe, at 2 weeks before the deadline. And then, of course, making sure you submit your application by January 9th. And then for the pilot programs, just a note that they're due just a little earlier in the evening. Resources. So this is not necessarily grant related resources, but this is just some resources that NDIA has about ACP in general. So for practitioners that are very interested in ACP enrollment and outreach and just increasing awareness in their communities, we have a resource page, and we write blog posts pretty regularly, and we also have an ACP working group that meets on the second Wednesday of each month. And if you'd like an invitation to that, let us know. And of course, for those of you who aren't already affiliates, we welcome you to become one. There are different ways to engage with NDIA and lots of opportunities. So if you visit digitalinclusion.org/join, you can learn about the different ways you can participate in our community as an affiliate. All right. Well, thank you. All right, so looks like we do have some questions. I will introduce again Miriam Montgomery we have with us from the FCC, and we can start with questions.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, I can, or Amy, I see, I don't know how you wanted to do it, if you had been collecting them.
There's quite a few, so I'm going to get started, and I'm going to pose them to both of you, and then let one of you, whoever is best suited, jump in and answer. Miriam, I think quite a few are for you. And for those of you, I don't, Miriam, would you take just a couple of seconds to introduce yourself? And I'm Amy Huffman, and I'm our policy director at NDIA.
Okay, hey everyone, Miriam Montgomery, I'm the program officer for the ACP Outreach Grant Program. And I just want to preface it by saying I'm happy to answer questions that are more programmatic and clarification related, but you know, if you're asking for insights into how we would you know, react to certain types of proposals or application, or help you strategize in your application development, those are the type of questions that we can address.
Great. It looks like we have lots of programmatic. So I'm just going to jump right in. So does the FCC have any videos, graphics, translated materials, infographics, or other marketing materials for grant recipients to use in executing this grant? And are there any templates that you have for the above mentioned materials?
So there's on our acp.gov website, there is a toolkit, an outreach toolkit. And that toolkit is something that we routinely update. So, you know, if grant recipients want to repurpose that for their communities, they're more than welcome to do so.
Great. Scott Quinn would like to know if a nonprofit entity can be the lead applicant in applying to the Your Home, Your Internet pilot program. And if so, can a nonprofit entity apply multiple times with different government entity partners? And can a nonprofit entity be listed on multiple government entity applications?
Each application that is submitted has to be unique. If you're submitting the same identical application for different funding stream, we're going to pick up on that. And there, you know, if you're looking to apply for one of the pilot programs or both of the pilot programs, there is a separate application process for that. And as Sion wonderfully mentioned, and she gave a great overview of the outreach grant program and the pilot program. It's actually nice to have someone else give that overview. They are different. The scope is different. The period of performance is different. The purpose of why they're established, both programs are truly different. So I would say, you know, for the pilot programs, the Your Home, Your Internet, if you are applying for that, you need to partner with a governmental entity, and the NOFO does provide guidance on what that process would look like. And it would really need to be the governmental entity applying for the application, applying for the program. And nonprofits seeking grant funding as part of that partnership with a governmental entity may apply for the grant program portion of it. But again, you would have to disclose exactly, you know, who the governmental entity is that you're partnering with and capture that as part of your submission. The same applicant kind of applying for multiple sources or appearing on multiple names, we're not going to fund the same applicant multiple times. So, you know, feel free to do that. But in terms of the organization that we consider for funding and that we, following the review process, is selected for funding, it will just be a one time, not many times.
Great, thank you. And so just to, you know, double down, so the nonprofits are not eligible to be a lead applicant in the Your Home, Your Internet pilot program, right? I think I heard both Sion and you say that. Is that correct?
So there is the application process in the USAC application portal, and really needs to be the governmental entity that applies for that. But what the NOFO does allow for is if a nonprofit that is partnering with a governmental entity is seeking grant funding, they can submit grant application for that, but they need to demonstrate that partnership, and the primary applicant on the USAC portal needs to be the governmental entity.
Okay, great. So a program question from Katie. She's trying to follow the client application process. Can you walk us through how a client would utilize this service? Katie, can you clarify in the chat, what do you mean ACP? We're gonna go to a different question while Katie does that. Someone would like to know if you could give more information about question 17 from the NOFO. Who is ineligible to apply for pilot program outreach grants awards? And does this mean that communication organizations who receive any funding from ISPs are ineligible?
So service providers, their affiliates, contractors, subsidiaries, and the NOFO has a more kind of exhaustive list. They are ineligible because one, it goes against the neutrality clause, and two, it does service providers stand to benefit from ACP enrollment. In terms of the contractor prohibition, if it's an organization that receives unrestricted funding from a service provider, meaning, you know, they receive a grant or like a donation of some sort. If it's unrestricted funding, then they would be eligible to apply. But if it's in a form of a contract, they won't be eligible to apply under this grant program.
Okay, great. David would like to know if anyone has asked the FCC if their database of eligible households can be searched by active duty or veteran status.
If our database of eligible households, there's a USAC website that has ACP enrollment data. We don't have a database of eligible households. There are different FCC or different external entities that have that data. I know some states have data on ACP eligible households versus those that are enrolled in ACP. We know there are some kind of organizations that have a take on that as well, more from a regional, national standpoint. But so if as an applicant, if you want to leverage something like that, that's totally up to you.
Okay. If a recipient will fund a partner organizations for eligible activities, for example, to help coordinate staff events, how should that partner be listed? As a pass-through, a contractor, or other?
So we just recently published an updated FAQs that goes into the distinction between a contractor and a subrecipient. Generally speaking, if you have an entity that you are sub-awarding the federal grant to carry out a portion of the grant, that is a kind of grantee sub-grantee situation. Contractor is where you're going through a procurement effort and contracting out someone, and you have, you know, like a binding agreement with them. And again, they're carrying out a part of the grant agreement. So it's really ultimately based on the relationship between the applicant and the subrecipient, if it's in a form of a contract or more of a partnership. But I would encourage you to refer to the updated FAQs that we just released. And there's a CFR link to that as well, and that provides more guidance on really helping determine and differentiate between a contractor and a subrecipient.
Miriam, I'm going to ask you one question that just came to the chat, and it might clarify something that I said, so it might be important. Anne is asking, so nonprofits who receive funding in general from ISPs or ISP enrollment are not eligible to apply, even if those funds will not be applied or coupled with the FCC outreach grant funds. That was not my understanding, but just to make sure. This is about not using ISP funds or merchandising while conducting outreach grant funded activities.
Yep, there can't be any kind of service provider branding materials. That's explicitly kind of an unallowable activity that is listed in the NOFO. in terms of like a nonprofit receiving service provider funding, again, right, it's ultimately, how is that funding provided to the organization? Is it in a form of a donation or is it in a form of a contract? If it's a contract, unfortunately, you're ineligible. If it's in a form of a donation or a grant, then it's what we consider unrestricted funding. So that would make you eligible.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a lot of questions. So we're gonna start alternating. So one here, how is application assistance and technical assistance defined?
Another question that made it to the updated FAQs. So I would definitely recommend going to our website, and I think I saw the link being shared here. I'm pulling the updated FAQs from yesterday. So technical assistance, one of the program rules is that for application assistance or helping a household enroll in the ACP needs to be done in person. That is one, grant funded kind of personnel sitting right next to an eligible household and helping them complete the application process. There are various reasons as to why that needs to be done in person. Part of that is it's really kind of a measure against preventing against waste, fraud, and abuse, right? And there is some sensitive information that's exchanged, so it's a mechanism to protect against that as well. Now, if we know there are call centers out there, and generally they provide informational services to households on different services that are available to them. And part of that could be on the ACP, and part of that can be helping households learn about the application process. That is what we consider technical assistance, and that can be done remotely. So if you are helping a household kind of understand the process of, and ACP does have a two-step enrollment process. First, you have to qualify for ACP, then you have to enroll with a service provider. So if you're kind of helping guide an eligible household through what that process is and answering questions, that is technical assistance, and that can be done remotely, and that's allowed. But if you're actually helping them complete the application process, that needs to be done in person.
Okay, thank you for that. We have another question. Are applicants able to embed ACP outreach efforts in conjunction with our regular program offerings as a nonprofit organization? We receive a large number of community members, and we would embed ACP forms and info sessions for these individuals. Or do allowable expenses need to be solely for ACP efforts independent of other outreach efforts?
The official guidance here is if you are using grant funding and you are conducting outreach, we will pay for grant funded outreach that is focused on ACP, right? So we know a lot of organizations out there in a practical sense do a series of outreach on a whole host of other programs, right? But what you are charging your time to and what you are charging for services to the FCC against this grant program has to be solely focused on ACP outreach and grant funded allowable activities. So just an example is like if you have a half-day event and a part of the agenda is ACP, you'll need to quantify basically what that portion of the ACP event is costing and bill that against the grant program. And then whatever additional kind of outreach efforts that you're conducting as an organization, that will be kind of a financial accounting that you will account for separately.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let's see here. Okay. kind of a similar question, just in trying to understand participation in more than one grant program. Can an organization apply to more than one grant program? And how many years is the National Competitive Outreach Grant?
So
performance.
The period of performance for the Tribal Competitive Outreach Program and then National Competitive Outreach Program is 2 years. And the period of performance for the pilot grants is 1 year. And because they are distinct, nothing precludes you from applying for both. You just need to make sure that you follow, that you are truly submitting a distinct application. And because it's a 1 year period of performance versus 2 years, your milestones need to reflect that, your activities need to reflect that. The pilot program, as Sion mentioned earlier, has a narrower focus for the Your Home, Your Internet. It's exclusively focused on outreach to households that are recipients of federal housing assistance, right? So it's a much subset population of those that are generally eligible for ACP. So it's truly different. So you just need to make sure that you're accounting for the scope and based on the purpose and nature of the grant program.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
And Jack would like to know, is the $500,000 minimum award a set aside for state governments? Or is it just that each state, territory, et cetera, will receive a minimum of $500,000 in awards to applicants statewide?
It's the former. So basically, if there are, hypothetically speaking, like Wisconsin, right? And we get applications from Wisconsin, and all the applications that we get, the funding request is in excess of, say, 2 million. We'll ensure that at least 500,000 is going to the state, to the eligible organizations within that state. We make the determination of who the money goes to based on who applies and at what funding they request. But it's just a mechanism to ensure that we know there are ACP eligible households across the country. We know ACP enrollment is way, compared to like eligible households, we know there are far fewer households that are actually enrolled in the ACP. So we want to make sure that we're targeting households across the country, and the minimum funding that we have kind of committed to is a mechanism to ensure that there's some funding going to every state and territory.
But not the state government specifically.
No, it's any organization within that state.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to keep the right order here. Okay. The question, I guess I'll highlight this as a good point to clarify. This question is particularly about the Your Home, Your Internet program, but there's a way we can address this generally. The question regarding not prioritizing a particular provider. And this person is wondering, are proposals, in the Your Home, Your Internet? So if your proposal includes a community-based Wi-Fi build, which I don't think is an allowable cost in the program, but okay. But the question in general was, would that be considered prioritizing a provider? But I'll let you answer, Miriam. Generally, when the FCC means not promoting a particular provider, the difference between that and, for example, if there happens to only be one provider in the area, just sharing that information, making sure that people know what provider services that area. But that's sort of, I think, the only nuance about not privileging providers. Otherwise, it's straightforward and not making sure that you're not steering or incentivizing people. Did I characterize that correctly? And does that help?
are. So there are a couple pieces there. One is, if you are informing a household on who the participating service providers are servicing that area, you are under obligation as a grant recipient to inform the household of all the internet service providers servicing that area. And then, as Sion mentioned earlier, consumer choice, that household will make an informed decision on what is the service plan and who is the provider that best meets their unique needs, right? So that's one point there. The other is, as a grant recipient, if you are conducting outreach events and you invite service providers, you can't select 2 of your favorite service providers and invite them to that outreach event and not the rest. If there are, the participating service providers in that area, if you're inviting one, you need to make sure that you're extending that invitation out to all that are available. They make the decision to attend or not attend. You can't control that, but you are making sure that you're not selectively eliminating some service providers from attending outreach educational events if you are extending the invitation to service providers.
Thank you for that clarification. I have a 2-part question. The second part gets into something that I didn't cover in detail during the webinar about supplanting funds, supplement versus supplant. But the first part of this question is, can a city government serve as the lead for all of the grants and pilots?
So if the city government is the applicant,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, right? It's probably, if it's a different arrangement, then that is something that person will need to elaborate on. But basically, the applicant, if that applicant is selected for funding, they become the grantee. They are effectively the lead, right? They can't pass on that responsibility to someone else, because ultimately now they are in a grantee relationship with the commission, and we will be holding that grantee accountable to make sure that they are following through with their approved proposal, approved projects, and their reporting progress on a quarterly basis.
Okay. And can the general outreach funds to help fund, can they be used to help fund any pilot programs? So I think that's getting to the question of, yes, I think you're starting to answer, yes.
Yeah, no, if you apply for the ACP outreach funding, so this is, again, and for those that have, actually looked at the application template, it's very detailed, and we want to make sure that you not only truly understand the program, understand your community you're trying to serve, and understand how you see your organization playing a role in helping bridge the digital divide and increase ACP enrollment. But we're asking you to provide a very detailed breakdown of how you plan to use the funds that you are requesting. And when if you are selected for an award, we're going to ask you report progress, as part of your financial reporting on how you're spending against these approved activities. So if we see that, you were approved for performing activities XYZ, but now you're funding, different set of activities, that's going to put you in a non-compliance situation. So you can't move money around what you propose to spend money for. And if you are approved for grant funding, that is how we expect you to spend money according to those approved projects. There is a mechanism to modify your budget. That is a request that will need to be pre-submitted to the commission, and we would have to review and grant that approval before you can move money around.
Okay, I have a question from Katie. Will there be any expectations around the number of households outreached and enrolled?
Expectations for whom?
I'm guessing the grantees for the ACP outreach grants.
So applicants will be giving us an estimate of how many households they intend to conduct ACP outreach activities to, and how many households they intend to enroll. We know you can't control the enrollment, but there is no expectation, but we do want to see a progress reporting on what type of outreach activities did you conduct, how many people did you reach, how many households did you enroll, and as part of the households that you enrolled, how many were actually where they're receiving internet or have access to internet for the very first time.
Thank you. And Miriam, I'm going to ask one question. It's specific to the pilot, and if we have to tap the pilot specialist, we can follow up. But is very interested. This is from Nate. This may be too in the weeds, but we're very interested in the Navigator pilot program as the only operating digital navigator program in our state, but with a statewide program launching next year. We'd like to apply to train our local navigators and give them access to the national verifier. I lost the question. I started reading it and it disappeared. I'm wondering, okay, Nate, I see your question, or I did see your question. We can follow up with the navigator, the pilot program specialist at the FCC and get your question answered. I'm sorry, I don't know how that happened.
I think it's my fault, Sam. I think I dismissed it as you were reading it. I thought it was in the, I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. No problem. Okay. That's all right. We'll go. Okay. We probably can take a few more questions.
I think I found it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question, Nate's essentially wanting to know if they can train the state navigators later.
I would redirect that question to the ACP pilots at fcc.com or .gov.
Yeah. Nate, we'll get you that
you.
specialized email address where the pilot expert can speak to it. But thank you for the question. Okay. Okay, this is a pretty good question, and it might be a good closing question. If the grants are awarded in March 2023 and go for about 2 years, what is the thinking of how long the actual ACP funding will last? Or actually, okay. So I think this question is getting at sort of, we know that, there's not going to be more funding opportunities or additional funding after the announcement of the date when the ACP funds are expected to be depleted.
Yep.
So that's what this question is getting at. How do we think about using the funds, knowing that eventually there will be an end date announced for the depletion of funds with ACP?
So that's one of the reasons why the period of performance for the ACP outreach grant is 2 years, because it kind of is in alignment with when we expect to deplete funding for the Affordable Connectivity Program in general, which is funded at $14 billion. And, in terms of and there is a wind down clause in the NOFO where if we see that we're depleting the ACP program funding at a faster rate than mid-2025, then we also don't want outreach partners out there conducting outreach activities on a program that no longer has funding, right? So that is when we kind of reevaluate how many open grants do we have and whether we need to close out those grants sooner than planned. But at the moment, basically, it's the reason why the period of performance for the ACP grant program is in alignment with when we expect to deplete funding for the ACP program as a whole, unless Congress reauthorizes it and provides additional funding, which is a possibility.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, might be able to squeeze one more question in.
I think I have an easy one.
Okay, go ahead.
Jack wants to know if you're selected for an award, what sort of agreement would the grantee enter into with FCC, and how would awards funds be dispersed? Would they be reimbursement or upfront?
So everything is going to be reimbursement. And that's typically the case with most federal grants, is they're reimbursement based. So generally speaking, we go through our review process and we make funding determination, and we select applicants that will be grant recipients. We'll issue a notice of award, and grantees or applicants have 30 days to accept or reject the notice of award. And once they accept, that kind of starts the clock on that 2-year performance period.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time, Miriam. 4 questions about ACP outreach grants, and we can drop them in the chat. What are the best emails for folks to use for application questions or general program questions?
So I do want to highlight that we have office hours coming up. One is on the 16th, and we have another one on January 4th from noon to 1. So if you have follow-on questions, you can just go to our website, our grants website, and the link was shared earlier, and just register for that. If you have other questions, there is a mailbox that you can email, and that address is acpgrants@fcc.gov. And we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you again. All right, everyone, I'll be sending out an email with some follow-up information and some of the links and email address that we shared. And if you have questions, be sure to send them. Thanks, guys.